So maybe functions, maybe methods, we do call them functions here. So basically it's just what a block of code, normally code that you likely use and use again, like the print function on there. We tend to print to the screen a lot. So basically already pre-written for us. We don't have to know too much about the details of it, but we tend to use it as a block of code that allows us to take in some parameter or some argument and then it print back to the screen. In this particular case, we know whatever we put in here, which is the string value, as long as it's going into a code, will be printed exactly the same thing. So we want to find ways that we can recreate our own block of codes like that. If it does take in an argument, then great. It will just take the argument and it will pass it on to the block of code and it will do what we tell it to do. So think of it that way. Block of code can take in some argument or it can just take some variables or numbers into it and then it can work with it. Right. So the keyword for creating function, anybody create a function? I'm sure this morning you saw you use the function. Keyword for creating a function is what? Def. Right? So it's just defining that function. So let's call it my function. Let me just do this. My function, and it's not going to take any parameter. And inside there, just like we used, we did an if else, we use the column to show which code belongs to it. In there, I can print my first function. So if I run it, what is missing? Not called it at all. So you can call the function if later on I go back down. So at the moment, we've just defined the function. So it's just sitting there doing it. It's just a block of code that's been defined, like the same way that code has been defined for us. But unless you call it, it's not going to work for you. So let's call it my function, which means at this point, we're actually loading it for it to be executed. So we run it, then it prints out my first function for me. Give it a try and let's see what comes up. You don't have to write exactly what I wrote there. Just let it do something else, print some numbers or something. Well, right. So basically, as you can see, when we did the print statement, we actually passed an argument to it. Some people tend to use argument and parameters interchangeably, but all they're saying is that we can, let's define another function. They're saying that we can pass some parameters. So just create some parameters. My second function, I don't know, let's call it second function. Weird name. Function 2, right? Argument function. You can call it whatever you want, but I want something that makes sense. The name doesn't have to be exactly as mine. So in this case, we want to give it some parameters, which simply means that when we call the function, we expect this function to take a variable or a number and do something with it, but most likely a variable. So let's give it name. So var name. If this were to be C++ or any other some other programming language, you have to specify the data type that you expect to take. By in Python, we don't necessarily have to. So let's say print, let's take, in this case, let's take name. And then we print the name. Good for him. Functions are always followed by these brackets, as someone would have seen earlier. What goes into the brackets is just simply taking it as we pass in an argument to it. So it's just simply the function takes this into the block of code, and it can work with that variable, right? When we define it and we put it there, it's just a parameter, right? It's a parameter that I can take in. We can do stuff with that parameter, all right? So let's say if we take in a variable in the name here right now, and then we say name plus space, you are awesome. You are cool. I think that's easier. You are cool. And yeah, so let's run it. When we run it, we don't expect anything to do happen with that function, as has happened here. We only got something printed from the main function, which is my first function. In order for it to appear on the output, we just have to load it. At the moment, we've written a code that's sitting somewhere in memory, not in the main code. So if we want to make use of it, we need to call that function, which is my argument function. But I'm not done yet, because this function takes in a parameter. So let's see what it takes in an argument. Let's see what happens when I run without it. It gives me an error because it's expecting some form of input to this function, and I've given nothing to it. So I'm going to give it an input, Michael. Then it prints out, Michael, you are cool. So why is that? It's taking this argument, replace the name with it, and wherever it says name, it's going to be the actual content. And if it says you're cool. So I'll let you have a go with it and write your own version. Then we continue. What will be the results of line 8 if I do this? What will be the results? What will print out? Okay. So basically, it's just going to replace all that. We've just created this small, tiny blueprint for it to work with. We can play with it more. And I'm sure as we go down, your question may be answered as we go to more mathematical formats, right? So let's work a bit more. We've touched on parameters, we've touched on arguments, and remember you have to use the same number of arguments. So let's extend this to then I'll change that to sentence, right? So what you would expect if I run this, you would expect some error simply because we're expecting 2 arguments, not just 1. In the parameters, we've set 2. So you can keep adding comma and then a bit more. So I can just add comma here and then write, you are cool. Don't know what is watching you. It's watching you. Yeah? Huh? What happened to the S? Yeah. Someone is watching. We can just use the comma here.
Why did you do that? Wait, what? Function twice.
Sorry?
Why did you do that twice?
It's a function. So at this point, we've defined a function. So we can call the function as many times as we want in the code. Remember, when the function is called, it's being actually loaded into the active part of the memory to work with. But just that the parameters can change. The argument can change each time. The parameter is the same. If we can easily do this, let's try something out. I'm going to print the sentence before the name. And you realize what is done is swap them around, because Whatever you place here will become name, and it will just use it in your block of code the way you want to use it. All right. So what I want you to do is to write a function, no, write a code that takes in the first name and the last name of a person. And then you use a function to print out the full name. Right. So in this case, we know the number of arguments we're going to have. And you notice that if we don't provide one of them, we do get an error, right? Let's say if we are expecting two and then we happen to use maybe, I don't know, we give only one of them, for example. So let's create another function and try to explore cases where we do not know the number of arguments that we're going to have. So let's say my function number 3. Please note you don't want to just give multiple names to the same thing. And in this case, we can have, where is it? Might give an error, but let's see. There, and we put maybe day. Try it out first to see whether it works. So print. Day of the week is come on. Day. What 3? Hmm. Then we can write, let's call the function. Let's see if it gives an error. No error at the moment, means we are on the right track. And let's call it main function. And in this case, it allows us to have what? A tuple, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. See how it works. We've not called the function yet. So yeah, we've called it here. So shall we call it at the bottom? So it becomes easier to work with. Let's call it on line 13. Run it. So we've got the day of the week is what? Wednesday. So if we go back to the code, you notice that by putting this star asterisk, yeah, by putting the star there, we managed to say we don't really know how many arguments we're going to have. So we don't know the full parameter list, but we expect to have some like a tuple there. So later on in here, we could just pass like a whole tuple to it. We've got a long list of strings. And from that, we can just say, use it as a tuple to bring out what? The second number, for example. Yeah?
What do you mean second one?
It starts from index 0, 1, 2. So we printed out the second. So if the very first thing you played with today, remember? I paused there as if we were not learning anything, but we were learning something. So if I do this one, we've got Tuesday. If I do 3, let me add more. Let me just add more. First day. Friday. And if you want a nice challenge, you can have a 4, isn't it? Range 7. If I've done any syntax error, someone should tell me. Any typographical error? No. Syntax. Does it go in bracket? Someone tell me. Most likely. Yeah. So we've got it printed Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, where's Sunday? Sunday, come here. Right? Sorted out for us. So we didn't know how many parameters we're expecting. But then at least by using the star, we get to play with it more. All right. You can use list of vegetables or something. Can let you finish typing it off and we'll continue. Ideally, you wouldn't have this many functions doing similar stuff, but let's add more anyway, so we can just look at things. So far, what you have seen is that, hello, what you have seen is that the first thing we put here will become name. The second thing we put here will become sentence, right? When we call the function, which is what we did. So it means that the position matters. Somebody asked a question about positional arguments. That's what it means, like the position matter or the position of the argument. Anyway, so let's say if we have my function 4, remember you don't have to call it the same thing, but it's just how I am calling it. And let's say it's a name, you can call it anything as long as you follow the rules, right? Similar to variables. Right. So let's say in this case, we're going to have something like children's name. So let's call it, don't know. The third kid, kid 3, second kid, kid 4. And then the first kid will be kid 1. Or you can call it student 1. Very long, but let's go with that one. So let me change this to 2-1, right? And I'm going to print the smartest student is, let's give it to student 1, right? Student 3. So we've got this. So we've got the first position, second position, third position, but these parameters have some variable names, specific variable names. So when we call it, we want to use the name to associate with the value that we are taking in. So we call this my function 4. So let's call it my function 4. And we said we don't want the position to matter. So let's call student 1. Let's use the equal sign to associate a name with student 1. We notice that we are calling student 1, we are assigning student 1 in the position that we normally assign to student 3, right? So student 1, let's call student 1 Matipa. MW for Matipa, right? And then student 2, actually, let's mess it up altogether. Student 3, T for TJ. right? And then student one, since student,
Student two. That's the
sorry,
I said you've already assigned student one. Student two.
have I assigned student one there? Okay, let's make the smartest person student two then. And since the student two is the smartest person, we'll give student two to Michael. Ah. And let's see what happens. Hopefully. Oh, my brain and then the hands are not coordinating, are they? So the smartest student is Michael. But what you notice here is that by using the equal sign, the order doesn't really matter because this is meant to be what? Student three, student two, student one. If I change this right now to maybe student one, let's see, maybe it was mistake or by chance. We expect the answer to be what? MW. You see? So the equal sign and just putting the name in the equal sign is just a way of simply making sure that we don't, if you don't remember the order, but you remember the names of the definition, will help you. Okay? Good. Give you a chance to give it a try as well. Then we can give ourselves a break.